Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Step Beyond Cyber. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss one of the biggest cybersecurity threats that all businesses face today, and that's business email compromises. I'm your host, Scott Kreisberg. And before we dive into today's episode, just a friendly request to help us by rating our podcast and hitting the subscribe button. Now, I'm excited to have Tim Derrickson on. He's our in-house CISSP, and he's back with us today. We also have a special guest from ConnectWise, Jason McNew. But before we get started, Tim, could you kindly remind our listeners about the purpose of the content we share here on this channel?
Absolutely. The purpose of this podcast is to provide news and information on cybersecurity and technology law and regulations. And all data provided on the site is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. And that is why I do cybersecurity and not broadcasting.
Thanks, Tim. I'm thrilled to introduce Jason McNew on today's podcast. With 25 plus years in IT, including a 12-year stint at the White House. So I think it's safe to say that, Jason, you've been around the cybersecurity block once or twice. Now, he's also a U.S. Air Force vet, holds a master's from Penn State, and is also a CISSP. Jason also founded Stronghold Cybersecurity, which was acquired by Appalachia Technologies. Now today, currently, he's the Principal Solutions Advisor at ConnectWise. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Scott. I think you covered everything. And what I do tell people is spend a lot of years working in buildings with no windows, surrounded by barbed wire and machine guns and that kind of thing. So really sort of extreme security environments. I had a presidential access clearance for 12 years, which is known as Yankee White. You worked on top secret special access programs, that kind of thing.
Awesome. So anything else you want to tell us about your background in cybersecurity or how you became interested in the ever-evolving cyber threat landscape? How you got into that exciting no-window building environment?
Well, I think spending all those years in the classified realm, we got regular classified briefings on things that were going on in the outside world as far as the threat landscape was going, specifically the kind of capabilities that nation states had and some of the advanced persistent threats actors had, and that kind of got me interested in that. And I was an IT practitioner at WACA, or the White House Communications Agency, so I did a little bit of everything in a really heavily secure environment. So pivoting into just security, a security practitioner was a natural fit towards the end of that.
Yeah, it sounds incredible, especially that all of it sounds incredible. I don't want to just pick one thing there. So let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of the episode. So how would you guys describe the current cybersecurity landscape, and what are the most prominent threats businesses face today? And we'll start with Jason on that.
Well, they're opportunistic, and the vast majority of this is just plain old robbery, and it's no different than robbing a stagecoach or robbing a train or robbing a bank out west. And for the most part, they're going to pick targets that are soft and not well defended. If you're going to rob a stagecoach, you're going to pick one with one gun on it, right? Not one with 5 guns or whatever. And it's not personal, it's indiscriminate, and there's 2 basic criteria for selection. Is, do you look like you have money? It doesn't even necessarily mean that you have money. You might not have cash flow. Maybe you have a nice website and marketing collateral and beautiful people on your website and all this stuff. So do they think that you have money, and do they think that they could steal it? That's kind of about it. But most of it is just good old-fashioned robbery. But since we're talking about business email compromise is a little bit more discriminate, and they do pay attention to current events, especially in in financial news. They'll look for changes in leadership in companies, mergers. Things are going to be a lot around new CFOs, new CEOs, new CISOs, that kind of thing. It's a little bit less indiscriminate, but it's it's mostly just robbery, plain old robbery.
When you're looking at specifically the threat landscape itself, what do you see as the low-hanging fruit when it comes to this type of compromise?
Low-hanging fruit is going to be mostly small to mid-sized businesses. When business email compromise and ransomware first started, they were kind of picking targets that were easy to find on the internet, so to speak. But they learned that the bigger targets that are more mature, they tend to be, better financed and more mature and have better processes in place. They have the people, process, and technology, a cybersecurity program in place. And they kind of learned that the small to mid-sized business is not going to have the security that, that big enterprise does. So they started choosing them,
Yeah, it's that discipline, right? Like the larger companies, will adhere to certain, conditions, and they have the wherewithal to do it. The small to medium sized companies, they do their best, but it's kind of hard. Is that what you see out there, Tim?
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think what's interesting though, what I wanted to bring up to Jason is then, and yes, but why are we always so concerned with LastPass, with all of these large breaches, whether it's, Kaseya got hit or MGM got hit, when we start seeing some of these large corporations getting hit, what, what chance does the little guy have?
My answer to that is, frankly, it has a lot to do with the news cycle. And, the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And things that are newsworthy tend to make the news, and things that, the media doesn't think are interesting don't. You know what I mean? So these, this fantastic breaches, the big ones like, the Kaseya and SolarWinds. And, these are the kinds of things that could be the subject of movies, right? You could see Harrison Ford in a movie like that, right? And he did do a movie like that years ago. I can't remember. He was the CISO of some company. I can't remember what that movie was called, but it's just, what interests people is what the news reports on, and the statistics tell a different story when you dig into things like the Verizon data breach investigation report and the reports by the big players in the space. They tell a slightly different story than what the news cycle does. So all that creates a perception, and we know that perception doesn't always match reality.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, we deal with a lot of the, small to medium size, like 50 employees and above. And one of the most common things I'll hear is like, we're too small. We don't have enough for the bad guys to even deal with. And it's like, no, you're not too small. You're
That's
just too
complete
small
baloney.
Yeah,
That's complete baloney.
News. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the target selection is indiscriminate. A lot of it's automated anyway. So you have these bots, right? Computer robots roaming the internet looking for exploits that they could possibly exploit. And it's just like what I tell people: imagine a blue whale patrolling the ocean, vacuuming up krill, right?
Mm-hmm.
They eat the krill and then spit everything else out. They don't care. They just swim around vacuuming it up, and that's exactly how this kind of works. It's indiscriminate. Small bit and the SMBs of the krill.
Absolutely. That's a great example. I'm going to remember that one too. Tim, you have anything you want to say about that?
No, I agree with him. I think it's some of the things that we've been dealing with, and just so you know, Jason, like we had someone come to us who got hit with not royalware, but ransomware, but a different ransomware, the Lockbit ransomware, where it was a small business. It was not something that I would have looked at driving down the road saying that this is the one I'm going to hit. But boy, they hit them and they didn't know what to do. So then they call us and we get to go in and look at what wasn't there. And it's just these smaller businesses don't understand. They need to change their passwords. They need to not use a cable modem, but actually put in a firewall. So many different little things. How do you see the evolution of cybersecurity landscape over the last decade, Jason?
You'd be surprised to find that statistically, the last time I checked, something like 7% of the world's internet users are actually in North America, 6.7% as of 2021. I've seen that statistics a few times. And in spite of that, something like 90% of the attacks that are taking place, the ransomware attacks and the crimeware attacks, are actually on North America. And the reasons for this are, social, political, economic, even religious for that matter. There's the old saying that all roads lead to Rome, but in the modern day, all roads lead to America. We export our entertainment, we export our technology, we export our culture, fashion. So it's an America-centric way, an America-centric world in many ways. And American brands are so pervasive and so iconic. I think that isn't the most widely known brand in the world is what, the New York Yankees or Coca-Cola or something like that. So you could go anywhere in the world and find people wearing New York Yankee hats. And my point is that it's a very America-centric world. And there's that old perception that the streets are paved with gold in America. And depending on where you live, that would certainly appear to be true. If you're living in, a shack somewhere in, South Africa or Mumbai or, the foothills of Rio de Janeiro or, just wherever, then Americans are going to look rich. So we make good targets for this kind of robbery.
Man, 7%, that's it. Yet most of the robbery comes comes overseas to us. That's
Correct.
That's fascinating. Is that why the FBI prefers people not to pay these ransoms, because they're going to foreign entities that are
That's a big part of it. I mean, a lot of it is cryptocurrency, so it's difficult and or impossible to track it. And law enforcement, I differ from law enforcement on that. Law enforcement will always say, don't pay the ransom. The reason they say that is because if nobody pays the ransom, then theoretically, then all the revenue streams would dry up and then they would stop doing it. But it just doesn't reflect reality. Let's say that you're a small to mid-sized business and you started the business, or maybe your parents started. It's a first or second generation business, and it's the functional equivalent of your 401k, and you're putting your kids through college with it, and you get a ransomware attack, and now you are dead in the water. You're not operating, no revenue's coming in, and you have this choice to make. I could pay this ransom and it might be 10% of my top line revenue, which may be a lot of money. That could be easily get into six figures just for that. Or I'm going to end up filing for bankruptcy because my business is, no longer functioning. So this becomes a very personal decision that's based on your personal tolerance for risk, finances, future plans, how it's going to affect your employees. And that's the reason why I differ with, law enforcement on it. Law enforcement, well, they're not going to lose their paycheck, if you don't pay, but you are, so it's a very personal decision. And I think we may see some legislation around that going forward. Congress doesn't really have the authority to tell people not to pay this, but they do have some authority about regulating currency, some constitutional authority around regulating the currency that they may choose to exercise to try and have an impact on this.
That would be helpful. Yeah, that would be really. Is that up there now, or are they just talking about it?
I've seen. I think that there's some bills being proposed and some ideas, but I don't know that there's anything formally, any bills sitting in committee or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah. So on this whole business email compromise topic that we're for today, could you give our viewers a brief explanation maybe of how this takes place? How do the bad guys use email against businesses? And have you noticed any particular techniques or changes in the recent years?
Well, business email compromise isn't like ransomware in that it's a little bit less discriminate, and the target selection tends to be a little bit more careful. And also the payouts for these are kind of bigger. So there's the risk reward scenario, right? There's not a ton of risk to them other than wasting their time. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because most of it's coming from overseas and jurisdictions where there's no laws against it. You know what I mean? That's another thing that drives this. In most of what we call the developed world, think of, the United States, Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Canada, that there's going to be legal prohibitions against hacking inside and outside of your borders, but not every country is like that. Like Russia, for example, it's illegal to hack. If you're a Russian citizen, it's illegal to hack within Russian borders. But if you're hacking outside of Russian borders, the Russian authorities aren't going to do anything about that. So when they set up these ransomware shops or these crime shops, they're targeting jurisdictions outside of their own because they know the authorities aren't going to bother them. So there's a number of things that contribute to all of this. And as far as the target selection goes, like I said, if they find a publicly traded company and maybe they get a new CFO in or something like that, or they'll look for things in the paper. And the way that it's gotten more sophisticated over the last 10 years, I think probably one of the biggest ways that people pick up on this is the people that are writing the emails, they tend to be ESL. And by ESL, I mean English is a second language. Yeah. You can usually pick that up when English is somebody's, second language. Not always, but they've gotten better at that. And automation, what we call artificial intelligence, I don't regard it as intelligence. To me, it's a very fancy algorithm that can mimic humans. It is not self-aware. It will never be any more self-aware than your toaster. But what we call AI is contributing to this because you could take emails and make them sound, more like they were written by a native speaker. So it's gotten more sophisticated. And as our defenses have gotten better, the offenses have gotten better. And it's, a back and forth kind of thing. Scott.
What do you think contributes? Do you think that the dark web contributes to these BECs and the fact that we go out, we hear of all these breaches where they're losing 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, however million of records of email addresses that they're actually pulling out and selling on the dark web. I mean, a lot of that also contributes to the BEC. Sometimes they get lucky, right? Sometimes someone's on a site they shouldn't have been on, they get hit, they pull down the email address of whoever it might be, George@ge.com, and they start working on, if they get the password, they're in. So how do you feel that plays into it as well?
Well, the dark web mainly is a way for threat actors to exchange information with each other in a way that they can obfuscate and then hide it from from humans. And in order to go, the dark web requires, in doing any kind of investigation on the dark web, it requires just good old fashioned footwork. It's like a beat. You have to get on there and then go looking for things and then get on message boards and talk to people and then gain their trust. It's kind of like, if you remember the original Star Wars movie, the Mos Eisley Cantina, never before have you seen a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, right? But that was where they went to get what they needed, wasn't it? And there are times that even personally where I was looking for information that was not available through normal news channels or not available on the clear web, and it was information that was being hidden from the public by whomever, and I would go look for it and then find it that way myself. You can go get information there that you can't get in other places.
Right. Do you find that it also has contributed, though, to the changing landscape as they get more organized as well, working with the dark web?
Yeah, definitely. But keep in mind that there's more than one dark web out there. When we talk about the dark web, most people, they're automatically be thinking about the Onion router or Tor, the Onion project. And, incidentally, that technology was invented by the Naval Research Labs, NRL. And if you remember Radio Free Europe from the Cold War days, it was kind of the internet version of Radio Free Europe. The dark web was originally conceived as a way for people that live in oppressed areas to get information out. If you're, living under an oppressive regime or something like that, or if you're a reporter in a very dangerous area and you needed a way to get information out from there, that's what that technology was originally invented for. And if you've ever taken the time to pull down the white papers that describe how all of that works, the cryptography and the mathematics, boy, that was a real team of eggheads that built all that stuff. Even with a master's degree in cybersecurity, most of that is beyond my ability to understand because I'm not a mathematician or a cryptologist. Those are different career fields. But it's all very sophisticated, and yes, they absolutely use it as a force multiplier and as leverage in order to hide what they're doing. Criminals always try to hide what they're doing, and that's the easiest way on the internet to obfuscate your information. There's other ways, and then of course, like I said, Tor isn't the only way. And this is technology. It's once it's been invented, it can't be uninvented. It's all open source, so really anybody can do this. Anybody that has the technical wherewithal and the desire to do it anyway.
So diving a little bit, maybe I don't know about deeper, man, because that was pretty deep in there. But are there any really prevalent techniques used by the cyber criminals to carry out these type of BEC attacks?
Well, probably the most common technique, what they do is they insert themselves into email chains somehow, right? So they'll compromise somebody's email, and then they'll compromise a partner's email. It doesn't even have to be you. They could compromise a business partner's email without even getting yours. And then they could masquerade as you by setting up fake domains, or sometimes they actually do a penetration, get a hold of a username and a password and compromise an account, O365 or Exchange or Gmail or whatever it is. And they will set up their own mail rules in there. So it's a good idea to check your mail rules periodically to see if there's mail rules that you didn't put in there in order to hide their communications from you so that you don't see them. And normally what they do is they'll sit in the email chains for a while and then do some reconnaissance to get an idea of who's doing what and who's saying what and whose roles are what. And then they'll pose as a client or a vendor, and then send finance information and say, hey, our banking and routing information has changed, and the next time we send you an invoice, we want you to pay it this way. And really, it's the banking and routing information of Mr. Bad Guy. That's the most common way that it's done, is by wiring money to the incorrect place. They fooled the victim into wiring money to the wrong bank account, which they control, and then they take off with it. And these things are tens, hundreds, or some thousands of sometimes even millions of dollars. There's been some really spectacular ones. So when it comes to the risk reward proposition, the rewards for this can be very, very big. So if someone were to spend 3 months full time on a heist like this, that's not an unreasonable thing to do with the expected rewards, the potential rewards. And I have no idea what their success rate is. I don't know if anybody knows that, but even if it was a fairly low success rate, it still makes sense to do it.
Yeah. So this lends itself to not necessarily being, the widespread situation as compared to what you said with regards to compromising maybe an executive or somebody within the company, and compromising their email and trying to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, what you're referring to there is, phishing or whaling. When you are, or whaling or spear phishing rather, when you are, phishing is when you're just kind of doing it indiscriminately. You're tossing your bait in and seeing what you get. Spear phishing is when you're interested in a specific fish. You know what I mean? I want that big fat tuna right there. I'm going to try and spear it. And then whaling is the same idea, but when you're looking for a high value target or a high net worth individual or something specific or something like that.
Right.
Or in the case, I suppose, where remember these celebrities were targeted, their iCloud accounts were targeted, and then their personal pictures were exfiltrated, and they didn't do that for money. They did it for the heck of it. That would be something I would describe as whaling. And it was fairly sophisticated, coordinated attack by a number of people that evidently hung out on 4chan. And 4chan is even on the dark web. You could go to that website. I don't recommend it. It's horrendous. But that's where stuff like that goes on.
Very interesting, man. Tim, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think he covered that one really well.
I think he did. I think he covered it really well. But with the increasing focus, though, on data privacy and cybersecurity regulations, how have let's say, the legal frameworks affected how businesses approach cybersecurity and how they respond to BEC attacks? Is there anything going on there?
That's a very complicated answer, and we're going to go down the rabbit hole academically there. We do live in a constitutional republic for now, right? Which is why everybody has a different driver's license, for example, right? We're all citizens of whatever state you live in and citizens of the United States of America. And the way that our Constitution is supposed to work is, unless Congress has the specific authority to do something, they're not supposed to. And there's not really any authority in the Constitution for Congress to do anything about cybersecurity for small businesses. Now, they try to do it in ancillary ways, by, the states will do it, and there's federal regulations that regulate what the federal government does. And then, the federal government does have broad reach because there's so much contracting that goes on. There's so many small private businesses that do contracting for the federal government. What's their budget? $3 trillion a year or something like that. So they can't regulate it directly. In order for them to regulate it directly, we would, technically have to pass an amendment for the Constitution in order for them to do that. There's about 20 powers enumerated in the Congress and the Constitution, but there's really not any kind of power around regulating what small businesses do. So, however, there's nothing in there that prevents the states from doing it. And, all the states have their own constitutions, and typically they can do what they want. So different states, California being a notable one, New York, are passing different laws. And I kind of suspect that as time goes on, that a lot of this is going to make itself. I would compare the state of cybersecurity in the United States and the developed world today to the way that safety was, say, 100 years ago. Remember in high school reading the book by Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, right? People falling in the meat grinders and that kind of stuff, right? So when I think of safety 100 years ago, I think of poor lighting and missing fire exits and no safety guards on machines. And I think that and it's also true that, Congress didn't have a lot of authority to do anything about that either. And it took time between, insurance and between private enterprises and between the various states in the Republic and Congress itself doing all those things working together. We have gradually made safety. Of course, we have OSHA now. But I think it's going to improve with time, but we're still really kind of in the infancy of all this. And like I said, the best analogy I have is it's kind of like safety was 100 years ago. Imagine going into a factory and it's 4 floors and there's no fire exits and there's no lighting. And, what is this? It's crazy. So I think in, a couple of decades when people look like what we were doing now, they're going to think that we were nuts. It's going to take time to get better. It's going to be a process.
Right. And it's only going to get better, as you just said, or more stringent or stricter or whatever you want to do.
It's going to get worse and better at the same time.
Do you feel that, so we have PCI DSS, which is obviously privately run compliance.
Correct,
do you think that we will see more privately run compliances before the government finally does catch up? I mean, we have our NIST libraries, we have FISMA, we have all these different compliances and regulations that we use for the federal space. But on the private space, we really don't. So even when we start talking privacy, right, you got your California Protection Act, you have New York's, you have the American, which still hasn't caught up to the others. How do you feel that it's all going to play? Do you feel that we will see more private compliances that will rise before we see the government really take control? Or do you think the government will
I certainly hope that these problems are solved through voluntary cooperation. Now, I have my own biases, of course, but one of the things that sets the tech sector apart from the rest of the global economy is, and think about this, the tech sector, for the most part, is made regular, so to speak, through voluntary cooperation, right? With all this stuff from the WCI SSP, there are no government-sanctioned licensed in cybersecurity or IT, right? So one of my old jokes I would run in my slideshows is that it would be completely legal for Supercuts to sell cybersecurity, but my company, Stronghold Cybersecurity, couldn't cut hair, right? So if you go get a will, or you go get your teeth cleaned, you get your hair cut, you get tattoos, you buy pizza, all these things are regulated typically by the states or the locality, and those people all have government sanctioned license. Tim, you and I are both CISSPs, right? But that is not a government sanctioned license.
Nope.
However, it is widely recognized as something that's being kind of on par with the CPA. The sort of, and my dad was a CPA, so I think that we can achieve what we need to achieve without regulations and statutes, without the force of law. I think that's absolutely possible. And I think the insurance companies are going to drive a lot of this, because the small to mid-sized businesses are starting to understand that cybersecurity insurance is necessary because these risks are extreme. This could be a disaster, and it could put you out of business, just like a building fire or a flood. And when you go to buy cybersecurity, the underwriters and the carriers and the brokers will tell you, well, you need to have these protective technologies in order for us to sell a policy. And people, they get that. It's kind of like telling somebody, well, okay, we'll insure your car, but it needs to have ABS, and it needs to have traction control, it needs to have seat belts, and it needs to have these other things. So it is getting better, and I think it's going to continue to get better. And I think the government's going to play some role in it at both the federal and the state level. But I think for the most part, the problem is improving on its own without too much intervention by the federal government. I think it's going to continue to improve, and I think these problems can be solved through voluntary cooperation. And we don't necessarily need to have statutes. And I'm sure that other people would disagree with that vehemently.
Yeah. Well, it's always better, I think, if private sector can take care of it before regulatory stuff takes place. But we'll see. And I tend to agree with you. It seems like it's already happening. So
I think it's absolutely happening, especially with cyber liability insurance, because they've really started to drive how we see small businesses taking care of themselves, but also how they're reaching out to be protected. So we're seeing more small to medium-sized businesses start looking externally to their own IT internal people to be able to secure their environments, since security and IT are two different things. And that's something that still needs to be learned, I think, in a lot of spaces.
I think this, Tim, I think it'll unfold kind of, let's use the National Electric Code as an example here, right? NFPA 70, National Electric Code. You ever read that thing? I've read that entire thing a couple times when I worked at WACA. And the National Electric Code is not a federal law or anything. It's a code, but the various states and localities have all adopted it and said, in order for us to give you an occupancy permit for a building, you have to follow the National Electric Code. It's not a federal law. It's not even a state law. That's the states and the localities that drive that. And I think what we could eventually see is something where we have the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, the CSF. It has the 5 functions, the 23 families, 108 controls. And by the time you factor in all the interpretation, which is in NIST 800-53, that's another 500 pages. It's kind of like the National Electric Code. There's a lot of meat on the bones with that thing. And you could see various industries saying that in order for us to sell you cybersecurity insurance, or in order to do this and do that, a state or a county or whoever could say that you have to follow the NIST Cybersecurity Framework if we choose to go that route. So there is examples and precedents of ways to solve this problem without necessarily having to do it via Washington, D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is good. So finally, looking ahead, what do you guys see as the most significant trends for threats in cybersecurity landscape? And if you have any recommendations for businesses to prepare for them, and you might have just gone over it, picking a compliance flavor. But anyway, I'll leave that to you.
Well, the first thing to do is to work with a qualified, practitioner like One Step and get an assessment done, because you don't know what you don't know. You could have glaring, gaping holes in your cybersecurity. Most people are not experts in this, and it's kind of like getting a homeowner's inspection on a new home. If you're somebody that can't change a light bulb or can't change a doorknob or something like that, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging way or anything like that. It's one of many forms of expertise, cybersecurity. But you bring in somebody like One Step, and they could use some automation, some tools, and then some Q&A, and then give you a good idea. Well, these are the things you could do right now to drastically reduce the probability and the impact of a bad outcome. So the first thing is to get a cybersecurity assessment done. And then the cybersecurity assessments are going to have some recommendations that you may want to implement over a period of quarters, say Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, because you can't solve all these problems at once. It's not practical. It's not cost effective, but you try to reduce your IT-borne business risk in a way quickly with spending the least amount of money, hit the low-hanging fruit first. So my answer to that is to definitely start with an assessment.
Yeah, I think that also when we look at these things, we go back to what I was just saying about security and IT. Bring in that expert, whoever that person is. Like you were saying, Jason, I can go and get a haircut and they can sell cybersecurity, but I can't sell haircuts. We do something very specific, and make sure that person that you're going to actually has some type of security background. There's a lot of companies out there right now that they're IT people, nothing wrong with IT people, but they're selling cybersecurity, not understanding, and just throwing tools at something.
Yeah, that's the people, process, and technology. You have to have the people in the process, not just the technology. Technology alone cannot solve these problems. And IT and security are separate disciplines, just as, you wouldn't have an accountant audit their own books. And it's not because they can, it's because they shouldn't, you know what I mean? But beyond that, there are different skill sets. And this is my opinion, but I think that your better security practitioners are people that cut their teeth on IT. So, if you know how to build a castle brick by brick, then you know how to protect it or attack it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, so this has been great. And that's all the time we're going to have for today's episode. Jason, thank you so much for your time and your insight, and I hope we can have you on again in the future. Tim, as usual, always a pleasure to have you and get your wisdom shared to our listeners. Thanks everyone for tuning in with us, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and turn on your notifications bell so that you are the first one to know when we drop a new episode. Remember, it's better to be safe and never just blanket trust emails you receive from within or even outside your company. Take a few extra seconds to apply good cybersecurity hygiene and verify you can trust that email. Until next time, stay safe.